first design directs are mainly the vibes rather than a realistic a person has to wear this.
Now, the next episode, which was episode 5, where Mando made his appearance for that bounty, I was the guy at the table that he cut in half.
You're really good at what you do.
Yeah.
He made a week of memes look epic.
Yeah, they've literally just been memeing at each other in the shop, and I've just been in the other room waiting for them to hand me a blade, going, come on.
Like, literally, the power hammer's on is going kushung, 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 and in my head, it's nothing but Carmella dancing.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Whoa.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's been a week.
I want to explain Mosaic Damascus.
Oh, boy. All right. So.
God, why'd you do this?
With the Darksaber, trying to get the black core and having the small striations and kind of energy crackles that you see in the various parts of media along the edge, there were a couple of different ways that we could have done it. I chose the most annoying. Well, second most annoying. The most annoying would have been stainless, but I'm not going to do that to you. What we ended up doing, was making a pattern called Seraphim pattern. It was developed about 2 years ago by a master bladesmith in Pittsburgh. And he hasn't really shared the pattern and how he makes it. You just have to stare at a piece and kind of yell at yourself and go, how does this work? So back in December, I actually made a test bar trying to figure out, okay, I know how the steel is going to move. Like if I take this point over here and I forge it this way, it's going to pull the pattern this way. So I made a very small test bar and ended up making my own little Ironheart of Mandalore out of that test bar. And then we did it for real. So I took the concepts that I learned making this test bar, which was about a pound, and applied it to a 30-pound bar. Slightly different, slightly heavier, just a little bit. So to start with the pattern, what we did was begin with what we call our basic blocks, which is just 30 layers, simple laminate. It is alternating layers of a high carbon, high manganese steel called 1075 and a high carbon, high nickel steel called 15N20. Numbers don't really matter here. All you need to know is it goes black and silver. That's the standard mix for doing Damascus. With taking those bars, I forged them so the layers go up and down as opposed to side, forged them square to match a giant, I say giant, it's 1.25 inch square, block of another high carbon steel which etches pitch black. So we forge weld that, and the starting billet for that was about 20 pounds, and I had 2 of them. So we do a 20-pound forge weld and then a 20-pound forge weld. We draw those down into a long, long bar. I think it ended up being somewhere near, I think close to 30 inches. It was maxing out the forge. So we cut that, stack it 10 times, do the same thing, stack it 5 times. At that point in time, we're at about 1,600 layers. And you'll see in the episodes, with forging Damascus and forging steel in general, you have 2 orientations. You have the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is when your layers are stacked on top of each other like this. All of your force goes through and across the grain boundaries of those layers. The hard way is 90 degrees. If you do it wrong, you ruin hundreds of hours of work.
Yeah, you can just push it right apart.
It just goes, and then you're sad. So, luckily, that didn't happen. We made 2 blades this week. One, very complex forge welding, but smaller. I thought that was going to be the hard one. The difficult one ended up being the larger blade, but very simple pattern. What I didn't take into account was the fact that I had to do a 42-pound forge weld. Now, 42 pounds, decent bit of weight, you lift that above your head, whatever. 42 pounds on a 20-inch extension at a contact point of 3/4 of an inch puts about 120 pounds of pressure right in your forearms when you're trying to move it. I'm not Paul-sized.
And it's also glowing red hot.
It's like 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a lot. It's a little bit of radiant heat. The benefit is I'm wearing a full suit of Kevlar and a Mando helmet. It was great. This was my PPE for the episodes, by the way.
It worked.
Like, it has an actual gold UV filter on it. 10 out of 10. Would recommend.
Yeah, especially
And
when
it isn't deformed or melted from the heat.
Yeah, that right there. That sucks.
and that's the guy on the camera that sucks too.
He's in more danger than I am. I'm prepped for this. I know when it's going to splatter. Normally when we're doing a lot of forge welding like that, I'm going to be in a t-shirt because it's hot. And so I'm used to getting a bunch of burns on my arms. I remember telling Carrie yesterday on the drive down, oh, I'm real happy. I might start wearing a full suit when doing Damascus in the future. I haven't gotten burned at all. And I said that a lot during the weekend, and I made Jamie kind of freak out. He's like, no, stop tempting Murphy. I'm like, no, what could go wrong?
No.
Nothing.
What's the worst that could
go
happen,
wrong.
Jamie?
Murphy has been on our heels this entire trip. Yeah, he's been waiting for us.
So we made the blades, forged them out, handed one to Paul, handed one to Bill for them to grind. Because at that point in time, my body was shot. I made Aaron and Jamie run the power hammer.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Surprisingly. And 30 seconds of that, I was already dripping in sweat.
The adrenaline.
Handling it for like hours and hours.
You just gotta drink more water.
He unzipped his suit one day and literally was just drenched. And I was like, man,
You
it's
could
like,
see
it's
the
like
steam
20 degrees out. We just
rising
got
from his body.
snow.
Yeah, it was a lot of steam. The shop can
Got
be
steamy.
20 to 30 degrees, but if you're doing big forge welding and you're moving around a lot, I mean, you're in front of a 2,500 degree forge holding a 2,300 degree piece of steel. I'm warm. Handy over here is like,
No, with how big some of the billets were from this, I was warm,
could
and I
feel
was
them.
yeah.
exactly.
One of the reasons that we go so large on, these were large pieces, is as you do each individual forge weld, the things that you see spraying off of there, some of that can be flux, but a whole bunch of that is metal. So the more that we do that, and the more times we have to cut and layer something, the less material we have. And because time is very critical, one of the things that we need is a backup plan all the time. And so part of that backup plan is to try and have twice the material that we need. And that's certainly part of what we were doing.
Yeah.
The piece that Paul has here is the remainder from one of the swords. And that would just about make another sword. Not quite, but just about, once it's forged out. So that's something we have to take into account as we're working. We call it Martha Stewarting, where you're putting it into the oven and pulling the finished one out. That's kind of the direction that we try and have that backup so that we can keep the camera busy.
It was a lot.
And we're
was
doing
doing
multiple
balls.
processes, and so we're kind of running handy all over the place
Yeah.
with the camera.
That
And then we
camera's
make
not
you
light.
stay up late and edit things so that we can come to conventions.
That's true.
But that's the reason why the billets are so large. Part of it is the way that you're cutting that pattern and creating the pattern,
Yeah.
and part of it is so we have additional material. If we, forge the blade out and we find that there's a big fault in the blade and we have to actually incorporate that into another piece or make another entire sword, we can't step back 4 or 5 days and do that. When there's just simply isn't time. It has to move forward no matter what. So we try that redundancy as much as possible. So when we're doing the casting, there's multiple sets of casting lined up so that the camera can see it as we pour and still see how it is when we're working in the waxes, or in this case, working in the 3D prints. And we had some weird things crop up in that, where some of the material that we were printed in was significantly more buoyant when I am placing it in what we call an investment, like a plaster, to put around the outside of that so that we can burn it out, create a cavity, and pour the metal in. It was so much more buoyant than the things that I'm used to using, or even wax, which is about a neutral buoyancy. And you can just put it in and take it out. I put it in and it just all broke apart because it would just float to the top of the slurry solution that I was using. So we can get problems crop up like that we're really not expecting. And then of course we mixed in some new guys who, while are handy prop makers, were certainly not used to the tools. And they I think they had a hell of a time, and they did a great job, as you'll see when we get into the episodes. But you can see one of the things that I watch for, both as the producer and as the boss in the shop, I go back and watch the slow-mos to see who's flinching and who's not under different circumstances.
I'm glad I'm wearing a helmet because I am just like terrified.
Aaron took a great video on his phone of that kind of explosion that you see on camera. And he is a long way away from it. And it goes to all the corners of the shop. I mean, it is absolutely wild.
The entire shop is a splash zone.
I went back and watched him in slow-mo, and he doesn't move an inch. And I think that's part of it is, he's got a full shield here, and he's experienced at the hammer, and he kind of knew that was coming. But, man, it is definitely some Hollywood-looking stuff, and it is not. It is the real thing. There was no
if you can
there was no intentional creation of that
there's
flame.
little brown splotches on my Kevlar suit. Molten steel hitting that.
Yeah.
Head to toe.
Yep.
When you're working with such high temperatures, such heavy tools, such heavy billets, and you're tired, you're achy, your muscles are fatigued, every movement is important. Everything that you do is confident and decided. Henny and I don't even have to talk to each other at this point in time. There's a shot where I go like this. That's position 2 on the hammer. Position 1, position 2. That's 2 different spots, 2 different orientations. Him and the camera are super sketchy around me because I know where he is and he knows where he is and he knows where he shouldn't be. And that's the best spot for the shot.
Yep.
Always.
And he just gets right in there,
And I'm usually, if this is where Gary is, I'm usually this close.
Yeah. So not only is it unsafe for me to overreact, it's unsafe for him too. So it's not something normal people think about. Of my reactions will directly influence myself, him, and the 3 other guys in the shop that are all within splatter distance of this 42-pound, 2,300-degree chunk of steel. And it's just like, walk into the fire. Do it.
Just another day.
That's right. So I'd like to come back to these the current builds that we're on and these guys, but in between here, before we come back to that, I'd love to get some input from you guys of if you have any questions on previous episodes or want to tell us things that were your favorite things or like something you watched and you were like, what, that didn't make any sense. Like we love to have that kind of feedback. So if any of you have any questions, we'd love to do questions, and then we'll come back to to what we're doing now. And you're welcome to ask questions of these guys as well if you're familiar with their work.
Just don't make them technical about
yes, sir.
about the forging process.
Yeah.
My favorite episode that I've seen was the chain sword from Point Bay episode.
Which is here in the booth.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
I need to ask Mike to pick it up. But wondering if there were any complications while making that or anything interesting while during that build process.
It's funny that as much as that was a mechanical thing, there were a few things that, I guess you have to be more versed with chainsaws, which I'm fairly okay with. I kind of took the lead on that. But, I didn't realize that there was a significant difference, at least with still, which is what we used for the basis of it, in the chain bars between the arborist saw, which is the small climbing saws, and the big saws. I think I used that might be a Farm Boss, which is their bigger saw that we pulled the blade from. So that blade is a 30 or 36 inch blade. I think it's 36.
36.
And so we pulled the bar from the arborist saw, and they're dramatically different in the way they mount. I don't know if we show that in the episode. But anyway, so that had to be, we had to alter that. But the biggest thing is, in designs like that, where you're working from fantasy to reality, you'll encounter a problem that you just did, that might even be obvious, that you didn't even give any thought to. So the cover on the outside of the blade completely inhibits the ability of that weapon to work. Like the teeth stick out, but you can't cut through anything. Well, it became even a bigger issue when we took it out to chop stuff with it. And, we like things that splash and make a mess. And all it did was take all of the stuff that would have been splashed all over the place and throw it back into the intake for the motor. So it actually ended up taking us an incredible amount of time just to get the shots that we have, because we cut milk with it, you know what I mean? Or pop bottles or something, and it just threw all that stuff right up inside. That was probably the biggest complication of the whole thing. Was figuring that out at the end, like how do we get this thing back running again? So that was a great build. It was really fun, but I feel like as we worked through that, none of it was particularly outside. There was nothing there that felt like a huge challenge other than the scale of it, obviously. And it was important because we have a lot of 40K fans in our life, and and we do a fair amount of work for Games Workshop. So we make all the Golden Demon Awards now, and we make all the plaques, the big steel plaques that are given out for painting competition and for the fight, the tournament stuff. Yeah. So we're making all of that stuff for them. So there's a lot of eyes on us. They're definitely watching, and that was of the things that we've done for Warhammer. That they definitely received that very, very well. So, and that was fun. I think that was what Man at Arms was our 150th episode or something. Yeah, I think it was. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Yes, sir.
How many lenses do you go to, or how do you protect them?
I have like just some filters that I put on it, like a UV filter, and then just like stuff to just protect it. Surprisingly, okay. This round we didn't get anything damaged, though. That splash that you see here, we did that. Where is it? Probably 5 times.
That's not even the big one.
That's not even the big one. I saved the big one for the episode. There's one where I'm even at like 20 feet across the room, I'm still getting splattered. And overall, I don't flinch, but there is one that was so big that I flinched. But luckily, I'm shooting pretty.
Maybe you'll see the camera do a little.
Yeah, I shoot slow enough. So this is at 96 frames per second. So I'm able, even if I flinch, I have like a second or two of time before I do. But no, I think we escaped with our lenses intact this time. But we talked about it though in the past.
Yeah, we were just talking about it because when we filmed the Art of War series, when we did the 18 episodes for El Rey for television, Jake Tawney, who was our director of photography on that, he shoots all of the what's the show, I feel terrible. Deadliest Catch. So he's the DP for Deadliest Catch. And he filmed our television show. And he has no self-preservation at all. And I think that's from being on board the ships. And this is like, oh, we're on ground. I'm not going to hurt me here. And so he used what we call a matte box, which goes on the front of the lens, to both allow you filters and protection on the front. And there are large filters that slide down the front of that protect the lens. And they're very expensive. They're about $450 a piece. And I have 10 of them that are damaged from just the last 10 episodes, where he would be, instead of being like across the room and zooming in, he would be on top of the hammer when that happens. Just completely immersed, which Hendy does too.
You've been doing that.
But I think Hendy has, instead of just like forcing himself into the danger zone, Hendy kind of knows what's going to happen. Jake didn't have, he wasn't around so long that he had the experience in that. But he's an Emmy award-winning photographer, and he knows how to get the shot, and he knows his body will grow back. That's kind of his attitude. So it's definitely something that has to be taken care of. We really have to watch, because everything that we have, all the cameras and the lenses to create the visual that you see, they're very expensive. So it's definitely something that we want to take care of. And they're not rentals. Danny owns them, so we definitely don't want to invoke
Carrie,
the insurance on that.
Exactly. And Carrie mentioned it too. It's like when you're in that situation, you have to know what's going on. So a lot of times before we even shoot, Gary and I, whoever's working, will go through the process. I'll ask him, where exactly will you be? And where should I not be? So then, and we almost have like a dance we kind of do where I watch his feet and I'll watch his body movements to see, all right, when he's going to go in, when he's going to go out. Because a lot of times I'm right on his hip and he has like a 35-pound, billet that's molten hot. And so I have to react just like that to make sure I don't, get hit by that. So.
Or stick your $15,000 camera in that hole.
Exactly.
It also helps that everything that we do is very planar. Hammer strikes will only send things in so many different vectors. And the closer you are to that, the safer you are, because you're only going to get hit in an 1.5 wide range. Now, granted, that 1.5 is going to suck. But like with Aaron standing 35, 40 feet away, I'm pretty sure your entire body got covered.
Oh yeah, it was like
bouncing off your armor and the helmet.
yeah.
When I went for that really big Forge weld, I just looked at them and I'm like, hey, helmets. So like glasses? No, helmets. You don't need impact resistance. You need coverage. You have beards and they're flammable resistance.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have to do a big fire checks at the end of the day. And that
yes.
Kind of thing. So
always a fire check.
That's certainly.
When we were making the orc swords, we kind of forgot going to lunch, and we came back and there was a box full of stuff to light the forges. We completely forgot about them, and they were just smoldering in a corner for about 20 minutes while we went and ate lunch. Came back in, where's that smoke coming from, guys?
I had never heard this before just now.
me and Kevin swung back into the room, and I'm like, hey, Kev, what's with all the smoke, bro? He's like, oh, everything's off. I'm like, let's do a double check right quick.
That's the same episode I lit myself on fire earth. So.
Oh, I think we have behind the scenes of that, too. Yeah, we'll have to show that.
Crap. Yes.
Who's next?
Considered painting like splash zone lines in the shop.
Right?
The entire shop.
The shop is not that big. It is. So
exactly.
it is about 20 by 30, I guess. So that seems large, but it's packed solid with equipment.
Because you won't stop buying stuff.
Yeah, there are probably like 6 or 7 forges throughout the shop, and it's a pretty tight area for that. So there's no real. Yeah, there's no real. It's not like that, sadly. Yeah. Yeah, in the summertime, the one whole side, if you go back and you watch old episodes, you could see outside in the background sometimes. And that is all now rolling doors. So that we can roll that open, but typically we keep it closed so that we can keep the light a certain way, because the lighting is very critical to get the look that we have. And also we use basically like a smoke machine called a hazer. And that creates that kind of color that you see in the background. That's the light reflecting through the haze. And it's hard enough to control that with all the heat, because as soon as it gets near either the forges or the power hammer, it goes straight up.
Yep.
So we're trying to get it to diffuse into the room, but it's much harder in the wintertime. In the summertime, it's easier to do, but it also can be kind of overwhelming to have, it's like an oil in the air all the time to do that. But it does create that look.
You don't realize how much air moves when things are hot in general. As you're working, the anvil will heat up, the sow block and the die on the power hammer will heat up, and that's going to cause convection currents. And the power hammer itself is putting air out at a cyclical rate, and then the flywheel is moving air at a cyclical. So you just see little eddy currents popping up.
Yeah, all over. Yep.
I saw a hand.
We gonna see the Beskar Spear this upcoming series?
Not yet.
Not a no. I take that.
There are certain friends of ours that were involved in that, and if we can convince them to be involved, I'm willing to move forward with that. We're not there yet. We'll see what happens when they see this.
You're really
So,
good at saying
yeah.
a lot with a little bit.
So one of the fun things that happened for me was we did an interview with the original designer that did the medieval versions of the weapons that these guys are producing. And at the end of that interview, as he was signing off, I said, hey, just stay here for a minute. Let me see if I can do something. And I picked up my phone.
Let me make a call.
And I called my friend Ardashir, who has been in quite a bit of stuff lately. And that's how we ended up with this gentleman. I just called him and said, hey, can you get on a call? And he said, a video call? And I said, yeah, one I can tape. And he's like, okay. And he went in and sat down in his house. That's his house. and stepped on and stayed on with us for at least a half an hour, probably closer to an hour.
And that's his, you'll probably recognize that outfit just behind him because he's the first live action clone.
Like actual
Yeah,
in
the
person,
actual,
yeah.
not CGI person. So from the Mando season 3 and all of that, and Andor and all of that.
Obi-Wan.
Yeah, and Obi-Wan too.
Yeah, so he likes being in helmets or in as an alien because he gets to come back. So if they kill him, he still gets to come back again. So he's in a bunch of different stuff. Yeah, he's in a bunch of different stuff. And he was on the Art of War series for us, doing some expertise stuff in the Persian Empire and things like that when we dealt with that. And that's how I knew him. I knew him from that. So, and also he and I had just been talking because there is a new series which we have not announced at all that will be both on the All Me channel and on Baltimore Knife and Sword. That is a video podcast series. They'll be an hour long, and they are Tony Swatton and I bringing in guests. So if you're a long-term Man-at-Arms fan and you remember Tony will be back on the channel regularly for the next year. And that'll probably be starting March 1st. So.
I have an actual forging question. When you were doing the high carbon steel at the center of the Damascus blade, how did you deal with the lack of tensile strength?
So, that is a really good question. You're not going to like the answer. Hey, does anyone here work for OSHA? Good. No, you don't. Okay. Jokes aside, so what we do is we will tack weld on the ends, and depending on the thickness of the material. So as steel heats up, after it reaches around 900 degrees Fahrenheit, it begins to hemorrhage its structural integrity. To the point, Aaron definitely noticed this, I handed him a billet, and he pulled it out of the forge and went, nah.
Yeah.
But as you're working these larger and larger and larger bars, you get to a point where the structural integrity of the steel itself begins to fail at temperature. The way I get around that is I swing it. I don't want to move at extension 42 pounds. So I drop it, swing my hips, and bring it up over my head and onto the power hammer. I don't have to worry about if it falls apart, if it's tack welded together. If I tried to move it at extension, it would go, eh. So,
And that's pretty standard for big forging work, either to go to the power hammer anvil or to an anvil in the center of the room. When you reach a certain size or length, because length, you get a weight issue, we will end up with a second person grabbing with a set of tongs as it comes out. But in the case of forge welding, where you're trying to keep a particular heat at a particular time, usually it's a single person, and that's exactly what you'll do. You'll take that weight and you'll just swing it through the air.
yeah.
Gary might be a little dramatic with the way he swings it through the air, but
You gotta make it
but it
pretty.
does work. Yeah, no, but it does work. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
great shot. I look forward to you seeing it.
Oh my god, I'm so excited.
I'll also say it's another really big thing with Hendy, because I'm swinging these right next to him.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, we're right
Yeah.
on top with the camera.
That's a real life
He
deal.
trusts me.
Yeah, that's more like 22, 23.
Yeah. For forge welding high carbon steel, you need to be within the realm of just about starting to melt. So depending on the alloy, between 22 and 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. With the Orc sword, one of the reasons I lit myself on fire is because we were working with wrought iron, which is very nearly pure iron, so it's closer to the elemental melting point of iron, as opposed to high carbon steel, which the The more stuff you put into it, the lower the temperature goes. Well, this stuff, you gotta work it at like 2,600. And 100 degrees doesn't sound like much, but 100 degrees when you're at over 2,000, it adds up. Because then you get your radiant heat and your splatter and your oxidation. And then you catch on fire and you need to buy a new apron.
And shirt, right?
And shirt, I went through the apron, through the shirt, through the other shirt.
Another part of the physics of working with billets this size and everything else like that, when they get thinner, you have to orient them in such a way when you pull them out. You keep them on edge because it's stronger and it holds its length like this, and you bring it vertical like that. If you pull it out like this, it'll just droop immediately. Right. You have to pull it out vertically, and you have to let it hang like that in such a way, and that's what he means, and then he swings it around and he puts it into the power hammer and stuff like that.
It's wacky.
I'm sure having the smallest side being the resting point is also very fun.
Yep.
It's so small, Gary. Why is this so small?
It's not like we make oversized things on Man-at-Arms at all.
I made chef knives before he hired me.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I'll be, no, leave it thicker. No, much thicker. No, way thicker than that.
He measures thickness in steel in eighths of an inch. I measure thickness in steel in thousandths of an inch. So, hey, the edge here is pretty thin. What do you mean? It's like a 16th, dude.
Yeah.
That's too thin. No. No. So then going from that to, well, you'll see the monstrosities down at the booth.
Yeah, let's go straight all the way back here.
So what was the most interesting part of this build? What was the most challenging? What would you do if you could go back?
Well, in this build, obviously there's a whole bunch of forging stuff involved in that, but what we would definitely do differently that you'll see, and we're going to talk about it in the main episodes, is so we went from the 3D print that you would get if you were on their Patreon, right, which they supplied us with the print. They also supplied us with some printing, some of which Gary printed, some of which they printed, went back and forth. But one of the things that we did, because they're props, the way that they're laid out, they have a central hole for a rod for the pieces to be assembled. Well, that doesn't work for us. We need a big slot to put the shape in. Well, normally what we would do is take whatever our master was, make a mold, and then either in with the master or in a wax that we would pour from that, we would burn a hole through it. Well, we couldn't do that. And the reason we couldn't do that is because we wanted to work directly from the pieces that they had printed. So that's what we were casting. And when you're printing, you print in hollow form. So the inside's got, some form of web that's, a structural thing. But so for me to be able to try and put a hole through that would have just allowed the refractory that we dip it in to flow into the inside of the part and ruin the casting. So we cast them solid. So there are a couple problems with the solid casting, one of which is you can have some shrinkage because you have, as the material cools from molten, it shrinks, and that shrinkage has to come from somewhere. There's ways to mitigate that by having a bigger pour sprue or a bigger cup that you pour excess metal in that puts pressure on it. But what we did is we just machined the slots. So we went back in these solid pieces and machined slots, and that made it actually much more difficult. It really added a lot of time to it. Honestly, it probably would have been faster to change the drawings in the beginning, but we just moved through this really quickly, and I also wanted to be able to kind of talk about that on camera. So that'll be something that we'll talk directly about on camera, and it is definitely something where if we end up producing more, which we're in conversation about, we will definitely take that into account for any kind of production run of anything we would do. But that was the biggest part for me. Obviously, Gary's talked about the differences in material, the amount of work that he had to do. I'm not sure, other than maybe being closer to the scale of the finished piece, that he'd do things much differently.
Actually, I would change a few things. Primarily, okay.
This is where we tell Gary that it's the scientific method and you only change one thing at a time.
No, change like 6 things at once and see what happens.
Figure it out later.
With the pattern for the Darksaber, there are 9 steps. Every step you lose, on average, 17% of your mass to oxidation. 17%. 9 times. Compounding. I would have done a different pattern. I honestly think we could have achieved a similar result not doing such a complex pattern, though it is super cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
If we just done stainless steel, which brings a whole slew of other difficulties with it.
Terrible.
Conflagration, excessive oxidation, delaminations, sure. But I wouldn't have had to work such large billet sizes. And that's on me. I chose to do this pattern. I'm like, no, we're doing it this way. And it's cool.
To create those lines in stainless rather than nickel, you have a higher failure rate, no matter how clean you keep the piece.
It's like
and so what we would have had to do, while he did do a lot of pre-build for the forging so that we would be, ahead when the camera arrived. If we were going to be working in stainless, there's so much risk there that we would have had to create a finished piece ahead of time. So we would have multiple stages and a finished piece that we knew we'd have 100% success rate. Because we have had some issues that in other blades that were things that were insurmountable at the time that we had with the camera. I don't know how many of you have seen any of the episodes from Art of War, but on one we make an all bronze sword. Well, we had terrible temperatures like we're getting this week, and it never really crossed my mind because we don't do a lot of sand casting, that the sand being so cold would prevent us from being able to create the shape of a sword blade in bronze. And had we not already cast a blade and had it sitting, which was not intentional, not at all. We actually did it as a demonstration in an unrelated event, and we happened to have the blade. So if you are able to watch that episode where we create that, you'll notice that we never really show the blade coming out of the sand, and that's because it's not there. What is there is actually ruined and not usable. And so we did switch over. We actually made the other blade, but it was made ahead of time in an unrelated project.
Weird bronze sitting in
Yeah.
the corner, isn't it?
No, it's the one. Yeah, you guys grounded into a completely other shape of blade.
Into
It was
the Zephyr.
That one,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
did the Zyphos one.
Yeah.
Yep. So there are occasionally times where we have an insurmountable problem where we have a time delay. We've only had a couple of episodes that we shot that simply couldn't be completed. When we made the Phantom blade for Assassin's Creed, we had to add a day or two to that. But the intention when we shot that was for it to be something very quick, so we only did a 3-day shoot, which turned to be absolutely impossible. It was impossible to do that. There was no way we could make it happen. When we did the sword for Godfall, which was a very involved sword, and we were doing at least 4 other episodes at the same time, so we were shooting that like 5 or 6 episodes in 8 days. I had to stay up around the clock for 3 days to get the castings right. And since then, we've learned other processes that are working great. So it would have been a much better way to go, but there was no time to make the change. We just, at first, we made a mistake of design for the type of casting that we were doing, and then from there, we just simply were at the limits of what we could work with that molten metal at the time. Now we're working much larger, but it happens. It happens where we get jammed up like that. So
We don't make mistakes, we just make smaller swords.
And we don't really make small swords.
That's another thing to the shop, is that there's so many different skills on base between all of us. There's 7 or 8 people that are usually around the shop when we're doing these filmings. We have so many different skill sets just hanging out. Someone can mitigate a problem most of the times if there is an issue, and then it doesn't become an issue at all. We just kind of move in that direction, we go with the flow. It's a nice thing about the shop that we're all pretty ready to accept if something messes up and then fix it from that point and move along. There's no reason to get dramatic and lose your head about it.
The varied skill among all the different smiths is pretty fantastic. And I know it can be a little frustrating for the viewer to keep seeing a kind of a change of people, but quite often all of those people are here anyway. They're there, they just might not be on camera because we are... we're producing. Last year, we did just about 2,800 swords last year. So it's super busy all the time. And we actually did a little bit more the year before in 22. So, and we're expecting, a big year again this year. So we're going to try and get as much on camera as we possibly can to move forward. So, yes, sir.
So you mentioned that part of the reason that you haven't put out any videos lately is because things have picked up in the shop otherwise. So is most of that on behalf of companies like Games Workshop? Is most of that directly to consumers? Or?
The vast majority of it, we wholesale to about 12 dealers to about 75 Renaissance festivals a year. So it is almost exclusively really to the consumer through a dealer we're working for. We are in an enviable position, I think, for a lot of artists when I can say that everything that we can produce is sold. All of our dealers buy outright. We don't have anything out. Like if somebody calls me and says, "Can I come over and see a sword?" I don't have anything. We have nothing. As soon as we can get things done, they go out. And it's been like that ever since things kind of reopened post-COVID, because they're outdoor shows and people are just simply going to more outdoor shows than they ever had. And I think maybe that period of a year where nobody was doing anything, what they were doing is they were longing to get outside, right? And this whole culture has grown again much larger during that period, I feel. And so it's really direct to consumer, and it is, while not direct from us, it's direct through these dealers at festivals. We are finally, after 10 or 12 years, revamping our website, and so we will have, there's a new website up. We're just logistically changing stuff. So if you go to BaltimoreKnifeAndSword.com, it'll show you the new site where, and I Make Swords will go to the new site, but the original BaltimoreKnife.com, which Google tends to recommend, I still am hassling with my Earthlink account to get that moved forward. So,
just saw a few people
a little cringe there. So that's just been a little bit of an issue. So, yeah.
Another question. You were saying you basically had to reverse engineer the alloy for the Darksaber build?
Right, the patterning, yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted, because I like the technical details. I like to hear specialists go on about process. So when you're starting the design process for appearance and what you physically need, what's the first thing you sort of look at to decide what alloy you're going to make?
So alloying and patterning are two different things. For alloying, I will look at the performance that is needed. So these are show blades. The alloy realistically doesn't actually matter as much as something like a high-end kitchen knife or stage combat blades. There are tens of thousands of different alloys of steel. They all have their specified uses. Just in a car that people drive, there's about 60 different alloys. That being said, most of the time, if we're doing Damascus, it's going to be 1084, 1075, 5920, or maybe 1050. There's a lot of numbers that don't really mean anything other than carbon content. So, the lower the number, so 10XX, so 1050 is 0.50% carbon. 1095 is 0.95% carbon. Points of percentages is very important when it comes to alloying chemistry. That's the difference between shattering like glass and bending like a spring. So you pick the right tool for the job, and then when it comes to pattern development, that is a long conversation. Patterning has fundamentally 4 different things that you can do. You can distort, you can remove, you can stretch, and you can compress. By removing material, you can expose layer lines deeper within the pattern, and then you forge it down and it shows it. By distorting, you twist, essentially. You take a bar, and if all the lines are going this way, you twist it, now the lines go like that. Compressing brings the pattern together, and it causes a C to form along the edges. And then stretching will just expand and blow out the pattern further and further. With those 4 fundamentals, you can look and decide, okay, that is a compression, that is distortion. That, I don't know what that is. Probably it's removal. Because depending on what cutters you use and depending on what angle you cut at, you can introduce a variety of different effects into the steel. If you want to talk more, meet me at the booth, because I will just keep going.
Yeah, he won't stop.
Does anybody have any questions for the Galactic guys? Is there cosplay or you?
Pick one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've been
We'll start
trying.
with you. Work our way back.
So, making the prints for them to use, have you learned something that you want to improve on for your own design, seeing them being used in that way?
Yeah. I mean, like Carrie had mentioned, different considerations on the interior. You know, we're obviously making them for 3D printed hobbyists, so we just cut a cylindrical hole through the center for
A steel rod.
A steel rod you get from like Home Depot or something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if we were to do another one, something like that, we'd definitely adjust some things like through the center core or
Space for a tang actually included in the file itself. That's an easy job on our end if we have any sort of measurements. It's actually really easy to edit that out, stretch that out, and actually form whatever their requirement is. It probably would have been quicker if they just asked us to
And
just
we
edit
and we have
reprint.
CNC drawings of the vast majority of our stuff, so it is quite possible for us to just send them a file, you know, that they can use to cut the center hole. But it wasn't something that we'd really thought about, and as I said, I did, once I thought about it, I was like, instead of dealing with that, I want to go from their files and show all the steps.
Yeah, it's very cool to see it, you know, exactly the same as what we work with being casted and being worked to completion.
Just a little hotter, just a tiny
Yeah,
tiny
a
bit
little
hotter.
hotter.
A little
Yeah.
hotter.
Yeah, a little heavier, but, is there?
Next.
You were actually up first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was curious about, you mentioned you were hobbyists, before you got into this, so what was the transition point from, like, oh, we're doing this as a hobby to, oh, we can sell these designs to, we have a Patreon and PSDs?
That was a very interesting journey. Yeah, it started out in like 2017, just with 3 3D printers in my living room. Just opened up an Etsy shop, you know, sell some of my prints online of cool helmets that I was making back then, and orders kept piling up. Easy solution is to buy more printers, and so at one point I had about 23 3D printers in my second bedroom, falling asleep to the whirring of machines and little servos. But then in May of 2020, so like right during the COVID lockdowns, I'm like, I'm gonna try it. I don't think I'll have a better opportunity or time to do it than this. I went full time, so been doing that since 2020. And Jamie here came on in last year,
Last year, near exactly a year ago, yeah. Before that, I was doing a PhD in international relations and victimology of terrorist violence. But during COVID, I picked up a 3D printer.
Picked up 3D printing, and we have way much more
fun than that. I remember being in a bedroom in Edinburgh in Scotland, and Google how to make armor 3D printer. And then this handsome face popped up on my screen.
Yeah.
And
so,
yeah.
It's been a crazy journey, especially in, you know, as we advance and master 3D printing, really, we're looking into more advanced methods like what these guys do, and seeing, you know, kind of how they mix together and can complement each other.
What's your process for determining like the sizing of models, and then what are you using to model the model?
Generally, it's my own head. So it's the one thing that stays consistent. I can always test, like, yeah, this goes on my head. That's good. For things like swords, it's just a gut instinct. We're artists. We're not like.
We try to find references.
He's been extremely helpful. Kind of taking what the concept artist had in mind, like what he drew inspiration from, looking at the actual historical version of that, seeing what those dimensions are, and then translating that back to our 3D model.
An example of that is Shin Hati from Ahsoka. The designer did was a Shashka? A Shashka, yeah. And so we saw that that blade design was clearly like Ukrainian-esque Shashka, and we're like, okay, what's the average length of that? Okay, it's scaled to a female form, so a little bit smaller for this actress. And yeah, that's how we sort of depict it. We wanted to get it somewhat accurate. We didn't want it to be massive.
Yeah. And for things like armor, it's just usually myself. Print it. Yeah, that's good. And send it out. And if you're consistent, and if I don't put on a ton of weight over winter, we're usually okay.
Of all the printers you've worked with over the years, which one's your favorite?
We are absolutely loving our Bamboo X1 Carbon. And so it's very much a turnkey printer where you just kind of pull it out of the box, set it up, and start printing.
How many do you have?
Well, like a drug dealer, they gave us the first one free. Now we have now we have 11.
Yeah, about 10 more. We're definitely addicted. It's sped up our prop making process considerably.
We went from about 80 printers to now about 40 or 50 because these printers are so much faster, so much better quality.
About 5 times faster.
That we don't actually need
better
as
quality.
many.
Yeah, and so we're able to finish a prop from print to finished piece in probably around half the time.
Yeah, easily.
And you know the print time is a fifth of what it used to be. And in 5 more years, I'm sure it'll just be absolutely nuts.
We'll be out the job. It'll do it all for us.
Probably.
Yeah.
Do you think metal additive will get to the point where it's actually usable for you guys, or is it still too far away as printed properties?
I'm sure that we'll.
Ain't nothing
we're
funny.
We're waiting for that day.
We got to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
our world's sort of completely joining at that point.
Yeah.
We're nearly there.
Interesting. I buy and sell a lot of tools. Well, I buy a lot of tools.
There you go.
So
there you go.
You know, and I'm hunting on, I don't know if it was Marketplace or Craigslist, wherever it was, and somebody's selling off an entire pattern making shop for a foundry. So I call him and I was like, so what I'm more interested in what happened with the foundry, right? Like, what's going on with the foundry? And he's like, oh no, we're fine. We just don't use the pattern shop anymore. And I'm like, well, how can you have a foundry and not have a pattern shop? And he said, because we print all of our molds. They don't print their masters. They actually print the sand that they then pour the metal in. So they're printing the cavity and then just pouring the metal in directly. That is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it makes sense, but at no point had I given that any thought that would be something that would be there. So, but anyway, so there you go.
Yeah. All right, that will do us on time.
Yeah.
If you have questions, you want to nerd out about patterning or additive manufacturing,
come to the booth. Yep.
Come to the booth. We have a couple of fancy new things for you to look at.
And there's some other members of Man at Arms there as well. Bill is down there and a couple other people. So.
Yeah.
Where's the booth?
Great question. Right when you walk in the vendor's hall. It's right there. It's awesome. It makes my life so easy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.